When trail maintenance crews pulled that weathered camera from a moss-covered crevice in September 2023, 11 years after Allison Parker vanished, they expected to find vacation snapshots. Maybe some shots of fall foliage, a summit selfie, perhaps the last image showing the moment something went wrong. What they found instead was 39 photographs that would raise more questions than they answered. Because those photos didn't document an accident. They documented something far more disturbing. I've investigated missing persons cases in wilderness areas for 25 years now. I've seen accidents, poor judgment, tragedy in 100 different forms. But what Allison Parker captured in those final 14 hours on Franconia Ridge, that was something else entirely. Before we dive into today's vanished story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe to Seek Stories for more mysterious disappearance cases. Allison Parker was 29 years old in October 2012. 7 years of hiking experience in the White Mountains. Wilderness First Responder Certified. She worked as an outdoor gear tester for Summit Trail Company, one of those jobs where getting paid to hike mountains wasn't just a dream, it was literally in her job description. Her boyfriend, Ryan Mitchell, described her as meticulous, almost compulsively prepared. She had spreadsheets for her gear lists. She triple-checked weather forecasts. She left detailed itineraries taped to the refrigerator even for day hikes. Allison didn't take risks. That's what made her disappearance so unusual from the very beginning. October 13th, 2012 started like any other autumn Saturday in the White Mountains. Clear skies, temperature in the mid-50s, peak foliage season. Perfect conditions for the traverse across Franconia Ridge, one of the most spectacular hikes in New Hampshire. 8.9 miles, roughly 6 to 7 hours for experienced hikers. Allison signed into the trail register at the Lafayette Place trailhead at 6:32 that morning. She told Ryan she'd be back by 3 in the afternoon. Standard route. Old Bridle Path up to Mount Lafayette, traverse the ridge to Mount Lincoln and Little Haystack, then down Falling Waters Trail. A loop she'd completed at least a dozen times before. She carried her usual gear. 3 liters of water, energy bars, emergency bivy sack, first aid kit, headlamp, and that Canon EOS Rebel T3i, a mid-range DSLR she used for product testing and her personal hiking blog. She'd posted to Instagram that morning. 6:30 a.m. Photo of her at the trailhead, backpack on, that familiar confident smile. Caption read, Ridge Traverse number 18. Fall colors are insane this year. Back by dinner. That was the last anyone heard from Allison Parker. When she didn't return by 4 that afternoon, Ryan wasn't immediately worried. She'd been late before. Sometimes you take too many photos, lose track of time. But by 6, when the sun was setting and her phone went straight to voicemail, he drove to the trailhead. Her Subaru Outback was still there in the parking lot. Alone now. All the other hikers had finished and gone home. He waited another hour, calling her phone every 10 minutes. Nothing. At 7:15, he called it in. New Hampshire Fish and Game deployed search teams at first light the next morning, Sunday, October 14th. They found her car exactly where she'd left it. Registration in the glove box. Gym bag in the back seat. Everything normal. Rangers hiked the entire loop twice. Helicopters swept Franconia Ridge with thermal imaging. They checked every ledge, every steep section, every place someone might slip. The White Mountains can be unforgiving. Steep granite slabs get slippery when wet. Weather changes fast above treeline. But October 13th had been perfect. Clear skies all day. No storms. No afternoon fog. No reason for an experienced hiker to get into trouble. Search dogs found nothing. 3 days of intensive searching. For days. A week. No backpack. No clothing. No disturbed vegetation. No signs of a fall. No blood. No struggle. Allison Parker had walked into the White Mountains on a perfect autumn morning and vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. The investigation went cold within 2 months. Theories emerged the way they always do when someone disappears without a trace. Maybe she'd staged her own disappearance, investigators suggested. But her bank accounts were never touched. Her credit cards never used. Every dollar she'd saved for the outdoor photography workshop she'd planned to attend in December was still sitting in her account. Maybe she'd fallen somewhere the searchers missed. But those helicopters with thermal imaging should have found a body, especially in the first 72 hours. Maybe she'd wanted to start over somewhere new. But everyone who knew Allison said that was impossible. She loved Ryan. They'd been together 4 years, talking about getting engaged. She loved her job. She had plans. She had a life she was excited about. Ryan never believed she'd left him. He came back every year on the anniversary, hiked that same ridge, left flowers at the summit of Lafayette. He kept coming back until 2019. By then, he'd moved to Vermont, started seeing someone new. Grief has a way of teaching people when to let go. But Allison's camera hadn't let go. It had been waiting in that crevice off Falling Waters Trail for 11 years. The trail maintenance volunteer who found it in September 2023 almost didn't pick it up. Just looked like trash at first. Another piece of plastic equipment wedged between rocks where a small stream cuts through the trail about 2 miles from the Falling Waters parking area. But something about it caught his eye. The shape, maybe. The way afternoon sunlight glinted off the cracked lens. He pulled it free from the moss and mud. Heavy. Professional looking. Not the kind of camera someone would just toss aside. He radioed it in to the ranger station before he even knew what he'd found. When they ran the serial number through Canon's database, the registration came back with a name. Allison Parker. Purchase date: March 2012. The same camera she'd been carrying the day she disappeared. They sent it to the State Police Evidence Lab in Concord. 11 winters of freezing and thawing. 11 summers of heat and humidity. The battery had corroded into a solid mass of rust. The LCD screen was shattered. Water damage throughout the body. The lens was cracked. The tech specialists told investigators that data recovery was unlikely. The SD card had been exposed to moisture for over a decade. But they had to try. And somehow, miraculously, they managed to extract the data. 39 photographs. All taken October 13, 2012. All time-stamped. All preserved despite the years and the weather and the damage. The first 11 photos were unremarkable. The kind of images any hiker might capture on a beautiful fall day in the White Mountains. Photo 1. Allison at the trailhead. 7:08 in the morning. That optimistic early morning smile. Red and orange leaves brilliant in the background. Photo 2. 7:43. Looking up at the steep section of Old Bridle Path. Granite stairs disappearing into golden birch trees. Photo 3. 8:26. First view opening up as she climbed above Treeline. The Pemigewasset wilderness stretching to the horizon. Photos 4 through 8 captured the ascent. Rock scrambles. Alpine vegetation. The increasingly dramatic views as she gained elevation. She had a good eye for composition. Knew how to use morning light. These were professional quality landscape shots. Photo 9. 9:57 in the morning. Allison at the summit of Mount Lafayette. She'd extended her arm for a selfie. Behind her, that iconic view across Franconia Ridge. The narrow rocky spine connecting Lafayette to Lincoln and Little Haystack. Perfectly clear skies. She looked happy. Tired from the steep climb, but happy. Satisfied. That was the last normal photograph Allison Parker would ever take. Photo 10 changed everything. Photo 10. Taken at 10:13 in the morning. 16 minutes after her summit selfie. The photo showed a trail cairn. A stack of rocks about 3 feet tall, the kind hikers build to mark the trail above Treeline where there are no trees to blaze. This particular cairn sat about 40 feet from the summit of Lafayette, right where the ridge trail begins its traverse toward Mount Lincoln. It was a perfectly ordinary cairn. Granite rocks stacked carefully to create a visible landmark. Hikers passed this cairn every day during hiking season. So why had Allison photographed it? Photo 11. 10:15. The same cairn. Slightly different angle. She'd moved maybe 10 feet to the right. Photo 12. 10:17. Same cairn. Different angle again. Photo 13. 10:19. Same cairn. Over the next 23 minutes, Allison Parker took 8 photographs of that exact same cairn. 8 photos. all taken from slightly different positions. You could track her movement around it in a circle, studying it, documenting it from every angle. When investigators showed these photos to rangers familiar with Franconia Ridge, they recognized the cairn immediately. It was a landmark. People used it for navigation. Thousands of hikers had photographed it over the years. So why would an experienced hiker, a woman who traversed this ridge 17 times before, a person known for her efficient, methodical approach to hiking, spend 23 minutes photographing an unremarkable trail cairn? Dr. Patricia Morrison, a behavioral psychologist specializing in outdoor recreation, was brought in to analyze the photo sequence. I've read sections of her report. She noted that repetitive documentation of a single object typically indicates one of three things. Either the subject is experiencing acute anxiety and seeking reassurance through repeated checking behavior, or they're attempting to capture subtle changes that others might not perceive, or they're recording evidence of something they believe others won't believe without extensive photographic proof. The cairn hadn't changed. When rangers examined it in 2023, it looked identical to how it appeared in Allison's 2012 photographs. Same rocks, same configuration, same position. If Allison was documenting changes, those changes weren't visible to anyone else. But here's what troubled investigators when they studied the timestamps more carefully. Most hikers spend perhaps 15 to 20 minutes at the Lafayette summit. Take photos, enjoy the view, have a snack, then continue the ridge traverse. The whole point of this hike is the traverse, that spectacular exposed ridge walk with 1,000-foot drops on either side. Allison had reached the summit at 9:41. Her summit selfie was timestamped 9:57. By 10:13, she should have been well along the ridge traverse, probably approaching Mount Lincoln. Instead, she was still near the summit, circling a cairn, taking the same photo over and over again. Photo 17. Timestamp 10:49. The cairn again. But this time, the composition was different. Allison had zoomed in close, very close. The photo showed individual lichen growing on the rocks, the rough texture of granite crystals, shadows in the gaps between stones. What was she looking at? What was she trying to document? Photo 18 marked a shift. Timestamp 11:12. The sky. Just the sky. Clear blue October sky with a few wispy cirrus clouds high up. The camera pointed straight up, capturing nothing but atmosphere. Why photograph an empty sky? Photo 19. 11:14. The sky again. Different angle. The clouds had barely moved. Photo 20. 11:21. Sky. Photo 21. 11:38. Sky. For photographs of empty sky over 26 minutes. But forensic photo analysts noticed something specific when they examined these images carefully. The angle changed with each photograph. The horizon line visible at the bottom edge of each frame showed she wasn't standing in one spot pointing the camera upward. She was moving, walking along the ridge perhaps, constantly looking up, photographing overhead while moving in patterns. The timestamps revealed irregular intervals too, sometimes 7 minutes between photos, sometimes 17 minutes, like she was distracted, or waiting, or watching for something, taking pictures in response to what she was seeing. Dr. Morrison's analysis suggested she was tracking something aerial. The irregular intervals indicate reactive behavior, she wrote, taking photographs in response to observed movement or changes, not on a predetermined schedule. But weather records from October 13, 2012 showed clear skies all day, no unusual cloud formations, no storm systems anywhere near New Hampshire. The FAA confirmed no aircraft were reported flying over Franconia Ridge that day. No helicopters, no small planes, no drones. This was 2012, before recreational drone use became common anyway. If Allison was tracking something overhead, no one else saw it. Whatever she was photographing was invisible to weather monitoring systems and air traffic control. Photo 22. Timestamp 12:34 in the afternoon. This image showed Allison's boots, just her feet standing on bare granite, slightly out of focus, like her hands were unsteady. The timestamp revealed something troubling. She'd been above Treeline for over 3 hours by this point. Most experienced hikers would have completed the entire ridge traverse and been descending Falling Waters Trail by now. The standard recommendation is to be off the ridge by early afternoon in case weather moves in. Allison knew this. She'd hiked this ridge 17 times. She knew the timing. She knew the risks of being exposed above Treeline. So why was she still there? Photo 23. 12:37. Her backpack lying open on the granite. Contents visible. Water bottles. Emergency bivvy. First aid kit. Energy bar wrappers. The image was sharp. Deliberately composed. Like she was creating an inventory. Photo 24. 12:39. A close-up of her watch. The analog face showing 12:39. Why photograph your watch when the camera itself was timestamping every image? Why create a redundant record of the time? Unless she didn't trust the camera's timestamp. Unless she wanted to prove she was experiencing real time, not something else. Photo 25 changed everything investigators thought they understood about Allison Parker's disappearance. Timestamp: 1:07 in the afternoon. The photo showed the trail. The narrow rocky path that follows the spine of Franconia Ridge. And there, visible in a patch of damp soil between granite slabs, were footprints. Boot prints, to be specific. Clear tread pattern visible in the mud. 2 sets of prints. 1 set heading north along the ridge toward Mount Lincoln. 1 set heading south, back toward Lafayette. The prints were fresh. You could see the sharp edges of the tread pattern. No erosion. No water pooling in the depressions. These prints had been made recently, probably within the past hour. Allison had photographed someone else's footprints crossing her path. Except when forensic analysts examined the image more closely, they noticed something impossible. The tread pattern was identical in both sets of prints. Exactly identical. Same lug design. Same spacing. Same wear pattern on the heel. Same small chip missing from the outer edge of the sole. These weren't 2 different people's boots. These were 2 sets of prints from the same boots. Allison's boots. But how could there be 2 sets of prints from the same boots going in opposite directions? Photo 26. 109. Another shot of the same prints. Closer this time. Zoomed in on the tread detail. Photo 27. 111. The prints again. Even closer. 3 photographs of footprints that shouldn't exist. Allison documenting evidence that she'd walked the same section of trail twice, in opposite directions without remembering the first time. Or evidence that someone else was on that ridge wearing her exact boots. When the state police finally shared these photos with Ryan Mitchell in November 2023, 11 years and 1 month after Allison disappeared, he sat in the detective's office staring at the screen for a long time without speaking. Then he said something that made every investigator in the room go quiet. "Those are my boots." Ryan explained that he and Allison had bought matching Vasque Breeze hiking boots in 2011. Same model. Same size because they had similar feet. It wasn't unusual for couples to buy matching gear. They'd even joked about it. Called themselves those nauseating matching outfit couples. But Ryan's boots had been stolen from his car 2 weeks before Allison's disappearance. He'd filed a police report. September 28, 2012. Someone had smashed his passenger window in a parking garage in Manchester. Took his hiking boots from the back seat. Nothing else. Not his gym bag. Not his climbing rope. Just the boots. He'd bought a new pair before Allison's hike. He was planning to join her that weekend, but he'd been called in for a search and rescue training exercise and had to cancel. That's why she'd gone solo. The detective pulled up the police report from September 2012. It was there. Vehicle break-in. 1 pair of Vasque Breeze hiking boots stolen. Value: $120. At the time, it had seemed like a random theft. Maybe someone needed boots. Maybe they were going to resell them. It happened. But now, looking at those photographs of duplicate boot prints on Franconia Ridge, it didn't feel random anymore. Someone had stolen Ryan's boots. 2 weeks later, that someone was on Franconia Ridge the same day as Allison. Walking the same trail. Leaving prints that would look, to anyone glancing at the mud, like they belonged to Allison Parker. Photo 28. Timestamp 1:43. The sky again. But this time the angle was sharper, more agitated. The image was slightly blurred, like Allison's hands were shaking or she was moving erratically while taking the photo. Photo 29. 1:59. More sky. Clear blue emptiness. Photo 30. 2:26. The granite beneath her feet. Just rock. But the focus was off, the exposure blown out. This wasn't the careful, professional photography from earlier in the day. This was someone taking pictures without really looking through the viewfinder. Dr. Morrison's report noted the deterioration in photo quality. The subject is exhibiting signs of acute stress, she wrote. Loss of fine motor control. Decreased attention to technical details. These images suggest fear response, possible panic. But panic about what? The duplicate boot prints? Had Allison realized someone else was on the ridge wearing Ryan's stolen boots? Had she understood what that meant? Or was it something else? Something the photos couldn't quite capture? Photo 31. Timestamp 4:17 in the afternoon. Everything changed with this image. The photo showed the interior of a structure. Wooden walls. A small window. A shelf with emergency supplies. This was one of the Appalachian Mountain Club's emergency shelters. Small cabins positioned along trails for hikers caught in bad weather. But here's what made investigators deeply uncomfortable when they saw this photo. Allison shouldn't have been anywhere near an emergency shelter. The Franconia Ridge Traverse doesn't pass any shelters. The nearest AMC cabin was Greenleaf Hut, but that was off-route, down the western side of Mount Lafayette. The shelter in the photo wasn't Greenleaf Hut anyway. Rangers recognized it immediately. This was the old emergency cache at Liberty Spring, located off the Liberty Spring Trail, on the opposite side of the ridge from the standard Falling Waters descent route. Liberty Spring Emergency Shelter was 4.2 miles from where Allison should have been, and not 4.2 miles along the trail. 4.2 miles through rough terrain, requiring her to leave the marked trail system entirely. The timestamp showed 4:17. She'd been above Treeline for over 7 hours by this point. If she'd started hiking directly toward Liberty Spring Shelter after her last ridge photo at 2:26, she would have had to cover 4.2 miles of difficult, off-trail terrain in less than 2 hours. Experienced hikers estimated that route would take at least 3 to 4 hours, maybe longer for someone moving alone through unfamiliar territory. The math didn't work. Either the timestamps were wrong or something else was happening. Photo 32 showed the interior of the shelter more clearly. The walls were rough wood, darkened with age. And there, scratched into the wood near the door, were words. The scratches were crude, made with something sharp. A knife maybe, or a rock. The letters were large, carved deep into the wood. Not alone. Photo 33. For 19. A closer shot of the scratched words. Allison had zoomed in, making sure the message was clearly visible in the frame. Photo 34. 4:23. Another angle of the same message. Someone had carved "not alone" into the wall of Liberty Spring Emergency Shelter. When? Why? Investigators contacted the Appalachian Mountain Club. They sent a crew to Liberty Spring Shelter in October 2023, 11 years after Allison's disappearance, to examine the scratched words in person. The scratches were there, exactly as they appeared in Allison's photographs. But dendrochronology analysis, examining the wood grain and aging patterns around the carved letters, revealed something unexpected. The scratches had been made at least 15 years before Allison photographed them. Possibly longer. The wood had weathered. Tree sap had seeped into the cuts. The message was old. But that raised another question. If the message was old, carved long before Allison's hike, why had she felt compelled to photograph it multiple times? What about those two words, "not alone," had frightened her enough to document them so carefully? And then investigators found the incident reports. 2 other hikers had disappeared in the White Mountains in October during the previous decade. Both were solo hikers. Both were experienced. Both were never found. October 2009. Rebecca Foster, 31 years old, experienced backpacker, last seen on the Liberty Spring Trail. She'd told her husband she was going to check out the emergency shelter, maybe spend the night if weather moved in. She never came home. October 2015. James Patterson, 28 years old, trail runner, disappeared somewhere between Liberty Spring and Franconia Ridge. His car was found at the trailhead. He was never seen again. Both hikers had planned routes that would have taken them past or near the Liberty Spring emergency shelter. The shelter with the words, "Not alone," scratched into the wall. When investigators interviewed Rebecca Foster's husband again in 2023, he remembered something he'd thought was irrelevant back in 2009. Rebecca had called him from the summit of Mount Liberty, about 40 minutes before she was supposed to reach Liberty Spring Shelter. She'd sounded off, he said, anxious. She'd asked him a strange question. If you were hiking alone and you saw your own footprints ahead of you on the trail, what would you think? He'd laughed. Told her she must have doubled back without realizing it. Told her to stop worrying and enjoy the hike. That was the last time he ever spoke to his wife. Photo 35. Timestamp: 5:48 in the evening. The sun was setting. The photo showed the view from the shelter doorway. Orange light painting distant peaks. Long shadows reaching across the forest below. By 5:48 in mid-October, darkness was maybe 20 minutes away. Allison was still at Liberty Spring Shelter, for miles off her planned route, with night approaching fast. Every experienced hiker knows that hiking unfamiliar terrain after dark is dangerous, especially off-trail terrain. You can't see routes, rocks, drop-offs. People get injured. People die. Allison Parker knew this better than most. So why hadn't she started back toward the trailhead? Why was she still at the shelter, photographing the sunset, when she should have been moving? Photo 36. 6:31. Almost complete darkness. The camera flash had fired, creating that harsh, flat light you get with built-in flashes. It illuminated maybe 15 feet of space. The interior of the shelter. Wooden walls. The scratched message still visible. And something else. On the floor of the shelter, Allison had arranged her gear in a specific pattern. Water bottles in a line. First aid kit opened. Contents displayed. Emergency bivvy unfolded. Headlamp placed carefully in the center. It looked like an inventory, like she was documenting her supplies, creating a record of what she had with her. But the headlamp was there in the photo, sitting unused on the floor. She had light available. So why hadn't she turned it on? Why was she sitting in an emergency shelter in darkness, taking flash photos with a perfectly good headlamp within reach? Photo 37. 7:03. The flash illuminated the scratched message again. Not alone. But this time, if you looked carefully at the shadows in the photo, something was wrong. The flash should cast shadows in one direction, away from the camera. Basic physics. Light source creates shadows opposite to itself. But the shadows on that wall didn't match the flash position. They fell at angles that suggested multiple light sources, as if something else in the shelter was producing illumination. A forensic photo analyst named Daniel Kim spent 4 hours attempting to determine where the additional light was coming from. He wrote in his official report, and I'm quoting directly, "Secondary illumination source, origin unknown, inconsistent with camera flash alone, unable to determine position or type of additional light source. A second light. Somewhere in that dark shelter, something else was producing illumination that appeared in Allison's photograph." Photos 38 and 39 were the last images Allison Parker ever took. Photo 38. Timestamp: 7:41. The photo showed the ground just outside the shelter door. Granite and pine needles. The image was blurred, shaky, like Allison's hands were trembling. And there, barely visible in the harsh flashlight, was a boot print. A single boot print in the dirt. The tread pattern was clearly visible. It was Ryan's stolen boots, the same tread pattern from the ridge photos. But this print was fresh, recently made, and it was pointing toward the shelter door. Someone wearing Ryan's boots had approached the Liberty Spring emergency shelter while Allison was inside. Photo 39. 7:56 at night. The final photograph. The camera flash fired one last time. The image showed the view from inside the shelter, looking out the doorway into complete darkness. And there, caught in the harsh light of the flash, standing perhaps 10 feet from the entrance, was something. The image quality was poor. Motion blur distorted parts of the frame. But you could see a shape. Dark clothing maybe. Or shadow. The photo was too degraded, too blurred to make out details. 3 separate forensic photo analysts examined this image. One thought it was a tree trunk. One thought it was a standing figure in dark clothing. The third refused to speculate, said only that the image was too corrupted for definitive analysis. But everyone agreed on one thing. Whatever Allison photographed in that final image, she'd been frightened enough to document it. Frightened enough to take a picture instead of running. After that, nothing. No photo 40. No photo 41. The SD card had capacity for hundreds more images. Allison Parker never took another photograph. Search and rescue teams had been looking for Allison since Sunday morning, October 14th, the day after she failed to return. Multiple teams. Dozens of searchers. They'd hiked Franconia Ridge. They'd checked the Falling Waters Trail. They'd covered every standard route. But no one had thought to check Liberty Spring Shelter. It was off-route, miles from where Allison should have been. There was no reason to search there. When teams finally reached Liberty Spring on Tuesday, October 16th, 3 days after Allison's disappearance, the shelter was empty. No backpack, no gear, no signs anyone had been there recently. The scratched message, "Not alone," was there on the wall, but it looked old, weathered. No one thought much about it. Search efforts continued for 2 weeks. They expanded the search area, brought in more helicopters, more dogs, more volunteers. They found nothing. The White Mountains are vast. Dense forest, steep terrain, thousands of places someone could fall, get injured, become disoriented. If Allison had gotten off trail and encountered trouble, she could be anywhere. The case went cold. Eventually, it was classified as a presumed wilderness fatality. They assumed she'd fallen somewhere, maybe at night while trying to hike out, maybe hypothermia, maybe a hidden cliff band. The mountains don't always give up their dead. Ryan Mitchell moved to Vermont in 2017. He still kept Allison's photo on his desk, still thought about her every October, but he'd accepted that he would probably never know what happened. And then, in September 2023, a trail maintenance volunteer found a weathered camera in a crevice off Falling Waters Trail. When the state police showed Ryan those 39 photos in November 2023, he sat in silence for almost an hour, just scrolling through the images, sometimes going back to previous photos, sometimes zooming in on details, sometimes just staring at the screen. When he finished, he asked one question. Why would someone steal my boots 2 weeks before her hike? The detective didn't have an answer, because that's what bothered Ryan most. Not the mysterious disappearance, not the strange photos, not even the duplicate boot prints on the ridge. The theft, the timing. September 28th, 2012. Someone breaks into his car, takes nothing but his hiking boots. 2 weeks later, October 13th, those same boots leave prints on Franconia Ridge the same day Allison is hiking there. The same boots appear in prints outside Liberty Spring Shelter that night. That's not coincidence, Ryan said. Someone planned this. The state police opened a new investigation. Not a missing person case anymore. A criminal investigation. They went back through old reports, looking for patterns, looking for connections. They found something. The boot theft on September 28th wasn't the only gear theft reported in New Hampshire that fall. Between August and October 2012, there were 17 reported incidents of hiking gear stolen from vehicles. Backpacks, boots, clothing, all taken from parking areas near popular trailheads. Most of the thefts were in the White Mountains. Several were at the same parking areas where solo hikers had later gone missing. And there was one more detail, something the police had never connected before. Rebecca Foster, the woman who disappeared in October 2009, had reported a theft 3 weeks before her disappearance. Someone had broken into her car at a Manchester parking garage. They'd taken her hiking boots. Same brand as Allison's. Same model. When investigators interviewed her husband again, he confirmed it. Rebecca had been upset about the theft. Good boots weren't cheap, but she'd bought a new pair before her final hike. The pattern was clear now. Someone was stealing hiking boots. Then weeks later, hikers who matched the boot owners' profiles were disappearing in the same areas where the stolen boots were taken. But why steal boots? What was the purpose? Dr. Morrison, the behavioral psychologist, offered a theory in her supplementary report. Boots leave distinctive prints. If you want to follow someone on a trail without being noticed, you need to leave the same prints they do. Other hikers might see the prints, but they'd assume they belong to the person being followed. They wouldn't notice the second person. And if something happened to the person being followed, the boot prints at the scene would be confusing. Two sets of identical prints. It would look like the person had doubled back, gotten disoriented, walked in circles. It would look like an accident, not foul play. It was a hunting technique, she wrote, stalking prey by mimicking their tracks. But there was one more detail that didn't fit the stalking theory. Something investigators discovered when they examined Allison's emergency beacon records. In photo 38, the one showing her gear laid out in the shelter, her emergency beacon was clearly visible. And it was switched off, deliberately turned off. Emergency beacons are designed to be activated in life-threatening situations. They send satellite signals that alert rescue services to your exact location. Every experienced hiker carries one. Allison had carried hers on every hike. So why had she turned it off? When investigators requested the beacon's activation history from the satellite service provider, they discovered something impossible. The beacon had been activated 3 times on the night of October 13, 2012. 3 separate activations, each lasting exactly 4 minutes, then manually deactivated. First activation, 7:39 p.m. Location, Liberty Springs Shelter. Second activation, 9:07 p.m. Location, 1.3 miles northeast of the shelter. Third activation, 11:42 p.m. Location, edge of a cliff band 2.1 miles north of the shelter. After the third activation ended at 11:46 p.m., the beacon was never turned on again. The locations made no sense. If Allison had activated her beacon at the shelter at 7:39, why turn it off after 4 minutes? Why not leave it on until rescue arrived? And how had she moved 1.3 miles from the shelter by 9:07? That would require hiking through dense forest in complete darkness. Dangerous. Nearly impossible without a headlamp. But her headlamp was visible in photo 36, sitting and used in the shelter. And the final location, the cliff band at 11:42, was even more impossible. To reach that spot from the 9:07 location, she would have needed to cover almost a mile of steep, rocky terrain in 2.5 hours. In total darkness. Without a headlamp. Search and Rescue Coordinator Thomas Bradley reviewed the beacon data in December 2023. He'd been part of the original search back in 2012. This doesn't match any distress pattern I've ever seen, he told investigators. When someone's in trouble, they activate their beacon and leave it on. They don't turn it on for 4 minutes, move a mile, then turn it on again. That's not panic. That's not injury. That's deliberate. The question investigators couldn't answer. Was Allison activating the beacon, or was someone else? If she was activating it herself, why keep turning it off? Was she trying to signal her location without fully committing to a rescue? Was she afraid of something finding her if she left the beacon on too long? Or was someone else controlling the beacon? Someone who wanted to create a false trail. Someone who wanted searchers to follow coordinates that led nowhere. The cliff band where the final signal originated was searched extensively after the beacon data was recovered. They found nothing. No gear. No clothing. No signs of human presence. The rock was bare granite, offering no place for evidence to hide. But standing at that location, looking down at the drop-off into the Pemigewasset wilderness below, Ryan Mitchell understood something. If someone had wanted to make a body disappear in the White Mountains, this would be the place to do it. 100-foot vertical drop into dense forest. Thousands of acres of wilderness below. No trails. No access. No reason for hikers to ever go there. She's down there, Ryan said quietly. Somewhere in that forest. And we'll never find her. The investigation expanded beyond Allison Parker. Detectives began looking at all unsolved disappearances in the White Mountains between 2005 and 2018. They found 7 cases that matched the pattern. 7 solo hikers. All experienced. All disappeared in October. All after reporting gear thefts in the weeks before their hikes. 3 were women. 4 were men. Ages ranging from 26 to 38. Different backgrounds, different lives, but all matching the same profile. Experienced solo hikers who knew the risks and took appropriate precautions. And in 5 of the 7 cases, other hikers had reported seeing suspicious behavior on the trails around the time of the disappearances. Someone hiking alone, moving off-trail, following at a distance, always too far away to identify, always disappearing before anyone could approach them. One witness, a hiker named Jennifer Cole, described seeing someone on Franconia Ridge in October 2012. The same weekend Allison disappeared. "I was coming down Falling Waters Trail," she told investigators when they re-interviewed her in 2023. "This was maybe 4 or 5 in the afternoon. I saw someone moving through the trees off-trail, down below the path. I thought it was weird because there's no reason to be off-trail there. Just steep, dense forest. But I figured maybe they were looking for a lost item or something. I didn't think much about it at the time." Detectives showed her photos of Allison Parker. Asked if the person she'd seen could have been Allison. "Maybe," Jennifer said. "The person was wearing a dark jacket. I couldn't see their face. But I remember thinking their hiking style looked off. Not smooth, kind of jerky and fast. Like they were chasing something. Or running from something." That sighting was at approximately 4:30 p.m., less than an hour after Allison's last daylight photo on the ridge at 3:47. If Jennifer had seen Allison, she'd been moving fast, downhill off-trail, heading toward the area where Liberty Spring Shelter was located. Running from something, or toward something. The state police tried to suppress the investigation details. Too many unanswered questions. Too many implications they weren't ready to make public. But word leaked. Online forums picked it up. True crime podcasts started covering the story. And that's when Sarah Chun came forward. Not the Sarah from the Yosemite case, different person entirely. Sarah Chun was a thru hiker who'd completed the Appalachian Trail in 2012. She'd been in the White Mountains in early October that year, doing section hikes before heading south. She'd stayed at Liberty Spring Shelter on October 8, 2012. 5 days before Allison Parker disappeared. "I almost didn't come forward," Sarah told investigators in February 2024, "because what I experienced sounds crazy. I thought I'd imagined it, or dreamed it. But after reading about Allison's photos, I realized I wasn't imagining anything." Sarah described staying alone at the Liberty Spring Shelter on the night of October 8th. She'd been tired from a long day of hiking. Went to sleep early, maybe 7 p.m. She woke up around midnight to the sound of someone walking around outside the shelter. "I thought it was another hiker arriving late," Sarah said. "But they didn't come inside. They just walked around the shelter, circling it. I could hear footsteps on the leaves. Slow, deliberate. Going around and around." Sarah had laid still in her sleeping bag, listening. The footsteps continued for maybe 20 minutes. Then they stopped. She'd waited in the darkness, too frightened to move. Eventually, she heard the footsteps again, moving away from the shelter, fading into the forest. In the morning, she'd searched for tracks around the shelter, found boot prints in the dirt. They were everywhere, she said. Circles of prints all around the shelter, like someone had been pacing or patrolling. She'd left quickly that morning. Didn't report it because she didn't know what to report. Someone walking around at night? That wasn't a crime. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were just weird. But now, looking at Allison's photos, at the boot prints, at the evidence of someone stalking hikers in the White Mountains, Sarah understood what she'd experienced. Whoever did this to Allison had been at that shelter before, Sarah said. They knew the area. They knew the shelter. They'd been there practicing maybe, or waiting for the right person to show up. Allison Parker's case remains open. Active investigation. The state police have assigned a cold case detective to review all 7 connected disappearances. They've increased patrols in the White Mountains during October. Rangers now check in with solo hikers more frequently. They've installed trail cameras at several remote locations, including near Liberty Spring Shelter. But they haven't closed any trails. Too much economic impact. Too many permits already issued. And without concrete evidence of an active threat, they can't justify shutting down some of the most popular hiking areas in New Hampshire. The 39 photographs sit in an evidence locker in Concord. They've been analyzed by over 40 different experts now. Psychologists, photo forensics specialists, wilderness behaviorists, even a former FBI profiler who specializes in serial predators. Nobody agrees on what the images show. Some see evidence of a stalker, someone who stole Ryan's boots and followed Allison into the mountains. Some see a more complex pattern, suggesting Allison was lured off-trail deliberately. Some see evidence of something that doesn't fit any known category of crime. Ryan Mitchell knows what he believes. He's certain someone murdered Allison. Someone who planned it carefully. Someone who knew hiking culture, knew the trails, knew how to move through wilderness without being seen. Someone who's still out there. He doesn't hike alone anymore. Refuses to go to the White Mountains even with groups. He's moved on with his life, remarried in 2021, but he still thinks about Allison every October. She was trying to leave evidence, Ryan said in his last interview with police. Every one of those photos was deliberate. She knew something was wrong. She knew she might not make it out. So she documented everything she could. The cairn, the boot prints, the shelter, the message on the wall. She was creating a record for whoever found her camera. She was telling us someone was out there, someone dangerous. And I think she was right. The camera remains sealed in its evidence box. The case file is marked active, but there have been no new leads since Sarah Chen's testimony in February 2024. Liberty Spring Shelter still stands in the White Mountains. The words "not alone" are still carved into the wall. Hikers still use the shelter during bad weather. Most of them never notice the scratched message. Those who do probably assume it's just trail graffiti. Franconia Ridge opens every spring and closes every winter. Thousands of hikers complete the traverse every year. On clear October days, the ridge is crowded with people seeking peak foliage views. Nobody mentions Allison Parker anymore. There's no memorial plaque. No warning signs. Just her name in incident reports and her photos in an evidence locker. But if you hike Franconia Ridge in October, if you reach the summit of Lafayette and you see that trail cairn where the ridge traverse begins, take your photo and keep moving. Don't spend 20 minutes circling it. Don't photograph the same rocks over and over. Don't look for changes that aren't there. And if you see boot prints in the mud that match your own tread pattern, don't stop to photograph them. Don't try to understand how there could be 2 sets of identical prints going in opposite directions. Just turn around. Go back to the trailhead. Go home. Because Allison Parker stopped to investigate. She documented evidence. She tried to understand what was happening to her. She spent 14 hours taking 39 photographs that captured something. Something that made an experienced hiker abandon every rule of wilderness safety. Something that led her 4 miles off-trail to an emergency shelter where someone was waiting. 39 photographs, and then she was gone. The White Mountains keep their secrets. Whatever Allison encountered on Franconia Ridge, whatever those boot prints meant, whatever was waiting at Liberty Spring Shelter, it's still out there. Still circling cairns at Treeline. Still leaving tracks in the mud. Still waiting at emergency shelters for the next solo hiker who stays too long, who notices too much, who tries to document proof of something that shouldn't exist at 4,000 feet. The camera has told us everything it can. The rest remains in the forest, in the darkness between the trails, in the spaces on the map where nobody hikes. And maybe that's where some mysteries should stay. Thanks for watching until the end. It really means a lot. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what stood out to you most. And of course, make sure to subscribe to Seek Stories and hit the bell so you never miss the next mystery. See you soon.